the three Aramaic words Jesus spoke that opened spiritual doors and revealed the path of inner awakening. For centuries, people have searched for the hidden meaning behind the words of Jesus. Many believe his teachings were simple, moral lessons meant only for their time. But ancient traditions suggest that some of his most powerful teachings were spoken in Aramaic. In that language, certain words carried layers of meaning far deeper than translation alone could reveal. Among these expressions, three words appear again and again in moments of awakening and transformation. These words were not merely spoken sounds, but symbols pointing toward inner spiritual knowledge. Understanding them may reveal how the door to inner awakening begins to open within human consciousness. Long before sacred teachings were written down or translated into different languages, wisdom was often transmitted through spoken words. These words were carefully chosen because they carried meaning not only in their definitions, but also in the images and experiences they evoked in the listener. In the time of Jesus, the everyday language spoken among many communities was Aramaic. This language possessed a unique ability to communicate ideas through layers of symbolism that connected the physical world with inner awareness. Unlike modern languages that often separate intellectual meaning from spiritual experience, Aramaic allowed words to function almost like living symbols. A single expression could suggest several dimensions of meaning at once. Because of this, many interpreters believe that certain sayings of Jesus were intentionally spoken in ways that encouraged listeners to look beyond literal interpretation. Within traditions that emphasize inner knowledge, often called gnosis, the teachings of Jesus are seen not only as historical statements, but as invitations to awaken consciousness. Rather than presenting fixed doctrines, these teachings point toward the discovery of a deeper reality within the human being. Ancient seekers believed that certain words spoken by Jesus carried a special significance because they appeared at moments of transformation. Some of these interpretations were preserved in spiritual writings, discovered centuries later, including texts associated with the Nag Hammadi. These writings portray Jesus as a teacher who encouraged individuals to recognize the divine spark already present within themselves. His words often served as catalysts for awakening rather than simple instructions to follow. Among the Aramaic expressions associated with these teachings, three words stand out because of the symbolic movement they represent. Each one reflects a stage of awakening that occurs within the human journey. The first suggests the opening of perception. The second suggests rising from spiritual sleep. The third points toward the recognition of the deeper source of life within. When these three words are contemplated together, they form a symbolic pathway. They suggest that awakening begins when perception opens, continues when consciousness rises, and deepens when the individual recognizes the presence of a deeper reality within themselves. The first of these Aramaic expressions is the word Ephphatha. In its simplest translation, the word means "be opened." Yet when viewed through the lens of spiritual reflection, its meaning becomes much richer. Opening does not only refer to a physical action. It suggests the moment when perception begins to expand beyond familiar boundaries. Many people live within routines and assumptions that shape how they interpret the world. When awareness begins to open, those assumptions can start to dissolve. A person suddenly begins to see connections, meanings, and possibilities that previously remained hidden. In this sense, the word Ephphatha can be understood as an invitation for consciousness itself to open. The second expression is Talitha Kum. These words are often translated as "little one, arise." The deeper symbolism of this phrase points toward the awakening of consciousness. When awareness opens, something within the individual begins to rise. The person starts to awaken from patterns of unconscious living and begins to experience life with greater clarity. The third expression is Abun, a powerful Aramaic word that appears in the ancient prayer attributed to Jesus. Rather than referring simply to a distant authority, the word can be interpreted as pointing toward the divine source of life itself. In contemplative interpretations, Abun represents the recognition that the sacred is not only external, but also present within the depths of human consciousness. When these three words are viewed together, they form a remarkable progression. First, awareness opens. Then, consciousness rises. Finally, the individual begins to recognize the deeper source of life within. The words themselves become symbols of inner transformation. Imagine beginning your journey with the two most powerful Aramaic words that open everything. A complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol exists for those who feel the call. Check The pinned comment. Below is the continuation of the script following the structure you requested. The first of these Aramaic expressions is the word if. In its simplest translation, the word means be opened. Yet when viewed through the lens of spiritual reflection, its meaning becomes much richer. Opening does not only refer to a physical action, it suggests the moment when perception begins to expand beyond familiar boundaries. Many people move through life within patterns of habit, distraction, and assumption. These patterns quietly shape the way reality is interpreted. When awareness begins to open, those patterns slowly lose their hold. A person starts to notice meanings and connections that previously remained hidden beneath the surface of daily experience. This is why many contemplative interpretations view the word Ephphatha as more than a historical phrase. It can be seen as a symbolic invitation for consciousness to awaken. When perception opens, the individual becomes capable of recognizing a deeper dimension of existence that was always present but rarely noticed. The second expression is Talitha Kum. These words are often translated as "little one, arise." The deeper symbolism of this phrase points toward awakening from a state of spiritual sleep. When awareness opens, something within the individual begins to rise. Life is no longer experienced as a sequence of automatic reactions. Instead, it becomes a conscious journey. The third expression is Abun. This word appears in the ancient Aramaic prayer attributed to Jesus, and is often associated with the divine source of life. Rather than referring to a distant authority, the word can be understood as pointing toward the sacred presence that exists within all living reality. When these three words are viewed together, they form a remarkable sequence. First, perception opens. Then consciousness rises. Finally, the individual begins to recognize the deeper source of life within. Imagine beginning your journey with the two most powerful Aramaic words that open everything. A complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol exists for those who feel the call. Check the pinned comment. When the three Aramaic expressions, Ephphatha, Talitha Kum, and Abun, are contemplated together, they begin to form a pattern that many spiritual seekers recognize as the process of awakening. Each word represents a movement within consciousness, and together they describe how inner transformation gradually unfolds. The journey often begins with the opening of perception. Many people spend years moving through life, guided primarily by external expectations and routines. The mind becomes focused on survival, achievement, and daily responsibilities. Yet somewhere within that routine there may arise a quiet question about the deeper meaning of existence. That question is the beginning of the opening. It is the moment symbolized by Ephphatha. When perception opens, a person begins to notice that reality may contain layers of meaning that extend beyond what is immediately visible. Curiosity awakens, and the individual starts searching for understanding. The second stage of the journey appears when awareness begins to rise. This stage is represented by Talitha Kum. Rising does not refer to physical movement, but to the awakening of consciousness itself. Old assumptions lose their authority, and the individual begins to experience life with greater clarity and intention. During this stage, many people become more attentive to their thoughts, emotions, and reactions. They begin to observe their inner world with honesty. This observation allows unconscious patterns to slowly dissolve, creating space for deeper insight to emerge. The final stage of this symbolic progression is represented by Abun. Here the individual begins to recognize that the source of life is not distant or separate. Instead, it is experienced as a presence that exists within the depths of awareness itself. This realization transforms the way a person relates to existence. For many contemplative traditions, this recognition is the essence of knowledge. It is not knowledge gained from outside authority, but understanding discovered through inner experience. The three Aramaic words, therefore, become more than historical expressions. They become symbolic signposts pointing toward the awakening of consciousness. If you feel drawn to go further, a guide already exists: the two most important Aramaic words that symbolize the beginning of everything. Correct sound, full meaning, and a sacred protocol for those two words. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. As these three Aramaic expressions are contemplated more deeply, their meaning begins to move from theory into personal experience. Spiritual teachings across many traditions emphasize that wisdom only becomes transformative when it is lived rather than simply understood. The words Ephphatha, Talitha Kum, and Abun can therefore be approached not only as ancient phrases, but as symbolic tools for inner awareness. The first movement begins with openness. When the word Ephphatha is remembered, it can serve as a gentle reminder to allow perception to expand. Instead of reacting immediately to situations with old patterns of thought, a person can pause and observe what is happening with calm attention. This simple shift allows the mind to become receptive rather than defensive. Once awareness opens, the second movement begins to appear. Talitha Kum represents the rising of consciousness. In everyday life, this may occur when a person begins to respond differently to familiar situations. Reactions that once seemed automatic slowly become conscious choices. The individual becomes more attentive to thoughts, emotions, and intentions. This stage of awakening often brings a sense of clarity. Life begins to feel less mechanical and more meaningful. Decisions are guided less by fear or habit and more by awareness. What once appeared confusing gradually begins to reveal deeper patterns. The final movement emerges when the individual reflects on the meaning of Abun. This word can be contemplated as a reminder of the deeper source of life, present within existence itself. When awareness becomes quiet and attentive, many people begin to sense a subtle connection between their inner consciousness and the larger mystery of life. In this way, the three Aramaic expressions describe a continuous process. Awareness opens, consciousness rises, and the individual recognizes the deeper presence that sustains life. These stages do not occur once and then disappear. They unfold gradually, returning again and again as a person continues exploring the nature of awareness through reflection and observation. The ancient words begin to function less as historical phrases and more as living reminders of the path toward inner awakening. When spiritual teachings are explored through contemplation, they often reveal that the journey of awakening is not something distant or extraordinary. It unfolds within the ordinary experiences of daily life. The three Aramaic expressions associated with the teachings of Jesus can therefore be approached as reminders that transformation begins in the present moment. The first stage of practice begins with attention. When a person remembers the symbolic meaning of Ephphatha, they allow themselves to pause before reacting to situations. Instead of responding immediately with habitual thoughts or emotions, they observe what is happening with openness. This small moment of awareness can begin to change how experience is perceived. The second stage follows naturally. As awareness becomes clearer, the individual begins to recognize patterns within their own thinking and behavior. This is where the symbolism of Talitha Kum becomes meaningful. Rising from spiritual sleep does not require dramatic events. It occurs when a person begins to notice how thoughts, fears, and expectations influence perception. Through observation, the individual gradually becomes more conscious of their inner world. Old reactions begin to lose their intensity. Instead of being controlled by unconscious habits, the person gains the ability to choose how to respond. This quiet shift represents the awakening of consciousness. The third stage emerges when attention turns toward the deeper meaning symbolized by Abun. In moments of stillness, many people begin to sense that life itself carries an underlying presence that connects all things. Rather than feeling separated from the world, the individual begins to experience a subtle sense of belonging within a larger reality. This realization does not arrive through intellectual reasoning alone. It grows slowly through reflection and awareness. The three Aramaic expressions therefore become reminders that awakening unfolds step by step. As perception opens, consciousness rises, and awareness deepens, the individual gradually discovers that the search for meaning often leads inward. The path of gnosis is not about acquiring external knowledge, but about recognizing the deeper awareness already present within human consciousness. Throughout this exploration, we have seen how three Aramaic words connected to the teachings of Jesus can be understood as more than historical expressions. They reveal a symbolic path of awakening that begins within the human experience itself. The word Ephphatha represents the opening of perception, the moment when awareness begins to expand beyond familiar assumptions. Talitha Kum reflects the rising of consciousness, when a person awakens from patterns of unconscious living and begins to observe life with clarity. Abun points toward the deeper source of life, the presence that contemplative traditions often describe as the foundation of all existence. Taken together, these three expressions form a progression that mirrors the journey of inner transformation. First, awareness opens, allowing the individual to see beyond surface appearances. Then consciousness rises, bringing greater attention to thoughts, emotions, and choices. Finally, the person begins to recognize the deeper reality present within life itself. This movement is subtle, yet it has the potential to reshape how a person understands their own existence. Many spiritual traditions suggest that awakening does not occur through sudden revelation alone. It unfolds gradually as awareness deepens and perception becomes clearer. The teachings symbolized by these Aramaic words remind us that the search for truth often begins by looking inward rather than outward. When a person learns to observe experience with openness and reflection, the deeper meaning of life slowly becomes visible. The words attributed to Jesus therefore continue to speak across centuries, not only because of their historical significance, but because they point toward a universal process of awakening. They suggest that the path of inner knowledge begins when perception opens, consciousness rises, and the individual recognizes the presence of deeper awareness within their own being. Everything begins with two Aramaic words: a complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol is now available for those ready to start this journey. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. In the next video, I will reveal another sacred Aramaic word connected to the teachings of Jesus. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and write in the comments what you thought of this content.